God, there's no harm in waiting. Our future is his present. He lives in time. He is time. So we ought to honor him. There are no excuses to prevent us from honoring him. God can let the sun stand still, and I think he let that transaction stand still. And so that is indeed a highest praise moment.
Dr. Tamara Chambers Richards shares about her and her family's journey to Canada in a 3-part series titled Highest Praise Chronicles of a Grateful Heart. Now, she joined me on deck recently to relate some of these highest praise moments recorded in her book. In our last program, Dr. Tamara gave us a picture of the preparation phase of the journey. There were many obstacles, but with each hurdle, the Lord made a way. We pick up the conversation at the point of another seeming dilemma. Word came back from the Canadian Embassy that the application for work or study had been approved, so a trip into Kingston was necessary. However, Dr. Tamara is unable to drive. What happens now? Let's find out.
What happens now is Andrew, my husband, he's not able to take me because he had taken 3 consecutive days off in the same month. So it's like, babes, you're on your own, you have to go chance it. But he's like, you can't drive that car because, of course, we've sold all our vehicles and we have this
jalopy.
Right? I call it the disadvantaged Nissan Sunny. That's how I call it. Right?
That's a nice way of putting it, yeah.
Right. So I'm not even going to try to drive that car into Kingston, and he's not allowing me. So, I called the transportation department and they said, oh, one of the drivers might be going to Kingston in the morning. So I called the driver and he said, oh, he'd be happy to take me as long as I'm happy with traveling in the truck and with all the stops that he has to make. I'm like...
Right. And this is a transportation department of NCU, to be clear.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So you're all for it because you're saying, listen, I have to go and figure out what the embassy means anyway. So this is an opportunity and you're running with it.
I'm running with it. So we drive. No, he had stops to make. And what he did was that he changed his itinerary so that we could get to the embassy first. So when we got to the embassy, we had to wait a few minutes for it to be opened. And I was one of the first persons to be served. When I got the envelope in my hand, I kid you not, it was stamped urgent. Remember now, this is a 7 weeks process that we had entered late. We had entered in at 5 weeks. They took 3 weeks to process, which is now 2 weeks before classes start. We don't have a lot of time.
Yeah.
So I just opened the envelope, and when I look, every single thing for my entire family's entry into Canada was within that envelope. I was like,
look at God. Listen, another highest praise moment right here. Even before the opening the envelope and seeing the approval for everybody, how he lined up the drive into Kingston.
Oh, yes. And, if I may, I would like to pause and thank Mr. Blake. It was a good ride. It was so encouraging. He was so happy for me.
Amazing.
Thank you, Mr. Blake.
So let's talk about purchasing tickets now. I mean, there are so many highest praise moments just in this short window before you guys transitioned to Canada. But even so, the number of God moments, we could take probably an entire day or more just to talk about this first aspect of your journey. But we're cherry picking because of time. Let's look at the purchasing of tickets now. Obviously, this is a costly trip. It's not just you, it's you, your husband, your 2 children. And tickets aren't cheap, and especially when you're purchasing tickets shortly before travel, you usually don't get the best rates. So you are working with all these odds, and it's a Friday that you're now purchasing your tickets. Tell us what's happening.
obviously the odds are just tremendously stacked because this is 2 weeks. This Friday would be 2 weeks to the original start of classes on September 6th. You know that the tickets, 2 weeks is where you have that window to catch the cheaper tickets before they
Right.
start just hike. So I had been looking for tickets before, and they were roughly, it would have been $2,000 for all of us to travel. It was a Friday. We got back with enough time before the sunset, and I was there just looking for tickets, looking for tickets, looking for tickets. And I found tickets for $2,000 for everybody to travel. And I started to order the tickets, but there was a glitch and the screen froze. So when I looked up, I realized that it was nearing sunset. So I was like, whatever. Sabbath is approaching. I need to get ready for Sabbath. So I just closed the computer and said, Sunday I will continue the transaction. Sunday, when I go back to complete the transaction, I kid you not, the tickets are half the price, and it was 900 and mash. That's roughly 100,000 Jamaican dollars. 900 and mash US dollars. That's what the ticket costs for our entire family to move to Canada in 2013.
Can I just pause to say, to God be the glory? When I think about how often we are faced with decisions where, all right, do I stick to what I know to be right, what I know to be true, or do I go in a different direction and then say God will understand? When I think about, the fact that, all right, Sabbath is approaching, you realize there firstly is a glitch. So we know that's God right there, right? That's the first thing. But you realize that you're approaching Sabbath, and as much as the situation is desperate, you still want to honor God's Sabbath. So you decide to wait. Mm-hmm. And look how God rewarded that step of faith and obedience. It's just, God is truly amazing, and he deserves the highest praise.
Absolutely. And, I'd like to add to that, because with God, there's no harm in waiting. Our future is his present. He lives in time. He is time. So we ought to honor him. There are no excuses to prevent us from honoring him. God can let the sun stand still. And I think he let that transaction stand still. Yes. For me. And so that is indeed a highest praise moment.
Amen. Amen. So we're going to do some more fast tracking. At the end of it all, you all got through. You, in your book, because many persons may not be aware that you do actually have a series of books. There are 3 of them under the title Highest Praise, Chronicles of a Grateful Heart. And you chronicle different aspects of this journey in your 3 books. I remember reading from the excerpt that I have for book 1 that at the end of the experience, you felt satisfyingly spent. Explain.
Yes. With any change, there is anxiety. So I would have gone through a myriad of emotions, feeling overwhelmed, feeling joyous, feeling anxious, feeling lost, feeling secure when God would answer prayers and do things. But when everything was said and done, when I had the tickets in my hand and could look back and see God move in every single way, and that I would indeed get my desire to start doctoral studies in the fall, because I also applied to Loma Linda, and they told me that I didn't meet the time frames for fall. I met the time frames for January. I was determined that I would start studies in the fall. Mm-hmm. And here I was giving up my role, my administrative role as academic chair of medical technology at NCU, for the role of full-time student, the unknowns. Mm-hmm. With that, I felt satisfyingly spent. I was tired. but I was excited and I was resting in God's goodness and His providence. So I was satisfied at that stage.
I can imagine. Much of this, what we've shared, and even more, you would have outlined in your books. And we're going to talk about where persons can get those books in just a moment. But just tell us briefly, stepping onto the plane, you've landed in Canada. Of course, you would have had your expectations. You would have also been open as well to new experiences and so on. Talk to us about what those first moments were like.
Oh, wow. I have to do this quickly because the first moments are long. First of all, this was a three-legged journey. So we flew to Atlanta, then we flew to Minneapolis, then we spent that night in the airport with a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, you can imagine. Then the next day we arrived in Saskatoon. It was a Friday. And of course, before we were coming, people were telling us how cold that place was. So when we got to the airport, the children were in their jackets. It was September 6th. But when I went outside, it was sunny and bright and warm. It was the tail end of the summer. And the immigration, we were processed in 15 minutes. And I've never gone anywhere before, and the immigration officer walks you with your bags to get a cab, to load you into a cab.
I don't know about that either.
That was the first experience. So you're thinking, wow, this is such a wonderful place. But I'll share a little bit because I don't want people to think, you're moving somewhere. God is with you, yes, but God doesn't promise a bed of roses. So everything in my mind, it did not go as it had been planned. I didn't get the scholarship that I had set my heart upon and knew that I had qualified for, but there's more in that story. You'd have to get the book to read that part of it. So we got there in September, and by the end of October, we had no money. Absolutely no money.
And that, of course, would have been devastating.
Absolutely. I'm a planner, As you can see, I line the paths and I walk in them. So for that little period, I had to get food from the food bank. That's the good thing about these countries is that there are social services. You can't be too proud. But this day, remember now, I have driving anxiety. I'm not even driving long distances in Jamaica, much less to go drive in Canada on the other side of the road. So I'm taking the bus to get food for my family. A food hamper is what we would call it. It's cold, it's winter. I'm a Jamaican. I know nothing about winter living. So I'm out there. I leave the food bank. The bags are so heavy that they're tearing into my palms. But I'm walking, right? Because I'm walking back to the bus depot to get the bus home. And I can't find my way. I'm lost and I'm feeling sad. What is this that I've done? Look at what I've come to. Look at me. I've left my home and my job, and now I've been added to the poor, getting food from the food bank. So I'm wallowing in self-pity is what you would say.
Yes.
And I'm cold. I'm not wearing the proper boots. I'm not wearing the proper mittens. My toes and my fingers are burning. And the bags are so heavy, so I drop them. When I can't find my way, I drop the bags at my feet and I look around me and I start to cry. And it's so cold that my tears, I don't even taste my tears because they're frozen. But I started to cry right there on the sidewalk and the wind is blasting. And then I said to myself, Tammy girl, if folks at NCU should see you now, they would say, what a pity. Mrs. Richards has gone stark, staring mad.
Yes.
So that little thought triggered now for me the humor of the situation because I know I'm not mad. My hair is chopped off. My long flowing hair that I used to have is chopped off because you can't afford to go to the hairdresser in these places. So it's wiry and I really look like a crazy person in these frumpy clothes crying in the middle of the street. So I start to laugh, right? Because you really look crazy. And then I feel better. The tears are a panacea, and I feel better. And then I look up, and the sun, the thing about it, it's so cold, but the sun is so bright. So I look up and I see a glimpse of God. And I say to myself, one day I'll remember this experience and celebrate how far I've come. So when I said that and I look across the street, there was the bus depot. So I just had to cross the street and find my way home. God is with us in all our circumstances. And no matter how much faith you have, you will go through moments of doubt and despair. But God is always there shining, and with God, there are always highest praise moments.
Love that word of encouragement my guest leaves with us today. I thank Dr. Tamara Chambers Richards for sharing aspects of her story with us. And if you want more details of her and her family's journey to Canada and how God came through, you can find out in her book, Highest Praise Chronicles of a Grateful Heart. It's actually a series, and you can find books 1, 2, and 3 on Amazon. Now, if you're in Jamaica and you want to purchase the book outside of Amazon, or maybe you just want to reach out to Dr. Tamara, whether you're in Jamaica or elsewhere, you can send an email to tamarachambers@yahoo.com. Again, that's tamarachambers@yahoo.com. I'm Nadia Pitkin. Join me next time for another inspiring conversation on deck.